Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. So here to share my thoughts once again on what my predictions are for the next little while, we'll say. Everybody wants to know what's coming next, and I must first say that this is just my opinion. Go and do your own research. Alright, so first off, for Canadians, you need to know that in the coming weeks we are likely to go into a lockdown scenario of some sort. We're already seeing social distancing get more aggressive. Prohibiting social gatherings over 250 people in various places. So what's going to happen next is that we're actually going to see some enforcement on that. Now, the cases are going to keep going up, and what you're going to see is the military being activated in some way, shape, or form. I have contacts who are very reliable, very credible, who have gotten the call to be at the ready. I think they're with the Canadian militia or reserves. I'm not really sure which department they're in, but they claim that, and they've shown me the proof, evidence, physical evidence, that the military is getting ready to intervene in any way that the government requires. Now, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, because obviously they're going to be needed, because emergency services may be overwhelmed. Now, I don't think that is going to happen that fast. People are panicking right now, especially in my town. The panic is going to really start to sink in the next couple days, because in the last video, I said that in the next couple days, you're going to see a case here, and sure enough, we did the day after. But these things take longer than people think, so it's going to take a while. We're about a month or so behind Italy, probably a week or so behind the United States in terms of some of the measures that they're taking. So the panic will sink in, and when that happens, emergency services, law enforcement are going to start to be overwhelmed, because if you're going to have a quarantine, you need to be able to enforce it. And the enforcing of the quarantine takes manpower, and to do that, you're going to need the military in some capacity. Now, we got a lot to talk about here today, because I'm going to talk more about crime in a little bit, but man, there is just so much stuff to talk about. So first thing I want to talk about is the Trump conference that was today. That is Sunday. I don't even know what the date is, March 15th, I think. And he talked about how he was consulting with the CEOs of various agricultural industries and food producers to discuss the prospect, I'm guessing, of possible food shortages, because apparently the grocery aisles are starting to dry up and there are supply chain issues. So we know China's been put on hold. They make a lot of the packaging. They probably do a lot of the manufacturing. The borders to Europe have been closed, which means that a lot of the stuff that would come from Europe, although it might be just sentimental, is still going to put a drain on the food supply chain. So he came out and said, yeah, we're meeting with the food producers, and they're saying, don't worry, it's all going to be great, it's all going to be good, no problem whatsoever, in the usual fashion, all the adjectives and all that. But there was kind of a contradiction there, and he said, but please don't buy more than 1 week's worth of food if you can. So I came out and I did a video about a month ago indicating that the system cannot deal with everybody wholesaling at once. And that's what has happened. Actually, still probably only 25% of the population are wholesaling. Even if a fraction decided to wholesale in one day, the system, the aisles would be empty, and the just-in-time delivery system wouldn't be able to keep up, because it's just in time. There's no storage space in the back room of these places anymore. Everything that is on the shelves is pretty much what is there. So this contradiction to me reveals that it is going to be a problem, and just the simple fact that he had to meet with them in the first place, I'm glad he was honest about that, but that indicates that the food supply chain will be disrupted to some extent or another, because remember, this is only the beginning. I mean, we may look back at these numbers, what is it, the United States now, 5,000, and that may well be a meaningless number in a month, never mind 2 months, 3 months down the road, never mind next year, when potentially 2/3 of the world's population has this illness. Because remember, with these types of viruses, you don't make vaccines. There's a lot of problems making vaccines, as far as I know. I mean, obviously they're going to try to make a vaccine, but based on what I've heard, the best case scenario for vaccine production is 18 months. So this whole slowdown stuff, and I'm not anti-Trump. I actually come to soften to some of the things that Trump has done and his approach to certain things, even though, I'm not going to get into, his character and all that. But what I will say is that, and not to be political at all, because I know a lot of his political opponents are using this against them, and let's make no mistake about it, this is not a political issue. He was probably the only person who, closed the borders on China. I think the Russians did too, maybe a few other countries. But he did take assertive action at an early time, so you can't say he didn't do that. But I will say that some of these travel bans that he's employing are having incredibly dire impacts on the economy, and they're only going to continue. Because what people don't understand is that it's not only a travel ban, but it makes it much harder for European countries who do business in the United States to be able to actually do that business. And it's going to cost 5 to 10 times the amount to actually have stuff flown over here. Take, for example, the Mira Safety Company, who provides protective equipment, gas masks, filters, hazmat suits, things of that nature. They now are suffering due to these travel bans because the price of doing air cargo has skyrocketed. So that's just one example, and we're only in the beginning of this. This is only starting. So you can bet if the president comes out in his usual fashion, as we would expect him to, and tells everybody not to panic, because I've been talking to all the food producers, that you can bet that there's a problem. Because remember, a month ago, maybe not a month ago, maybe a few weeks ago, he came on and he said that in a week's time, there's going to be 0 cases in the U.S. Just remember that. And remember, this is not a stab against Trump. Okay, I could care less who said it. The reality is the commander-in-chief, the person in charge, is there to keep control of the masses. That's their primary job. And as preppers and people who are already ready for this type of situation to kick off, we should applaud that. We should be happy that they're trying to keep the peace. We should be happy that the WHO didn't declare a pandemic sooner, because it bought countries more time to deal with the economic fallout of them doing so. And that's a yo-yo situation in itself. I'm not going to have any time to talk about the economy in this video. Now, the problem with the Europe embargo, or whatever you want to call it, is that what's going to happen after a month? Do you seriously think the situation is going to be contained in a month? When you have France coming up, you have Germany coming up, you have Spain, where Italy was around a week and a half ago. All of these countries, every country in Europe is now inundated with this. So what is going to start off as a month-long embargo, for lack of better words, I guess, month-long travel restrictions, but it really does put a drag on trade. So we have to consider the embargo aspect of it. So what are they going to do? Are they going to extend it another month? Well, what you're going to see then is these problems that I'm talking about multiply. And what are you going to do when this takes root in India, which it is? Right now, in about a month's time, it's going to be as bad in India as it is in Italy right now. I'm guessing maybe a month and a half. And when it starts to spread to the African continent and to India and some of these more impoverished countries, the problem is you can only keep your borders closed for so long. I just seen some guy run a stop sign. It's not SHDF yet. We're not making our own rules yet. Please obey the rules. You don't want to get somebody else killed. Anyways, so I see these measures as slowing the spread, and that's really what they're trying to do. They're not trying to contain it. They're not trying to stop it. They're trying to, what did they call it? Push back the curve, or lower the curve, or flatten the curve, or something like that, so that they don't overwhelm the healthcare system. And I understand that, because they know full well that once they open the floodgates again to Europe, that this is going to quickly overwhelm the system. So all they're doing right now is preparing. President's coming out and saying, don't buy more than a week's worth of food, when they know that people are going to be locked down in quarantine for longer than that. So that's the scary part to me, is that there's a direct contradiction there with respect to what is going to be expected, what we all know is coming because we've seen it in other countries, and what they're telling us to prepare for. And then on the other side, they're saying, well, it's all good. We have lots of food. There's going to be lots of food. In the coming weeks, if you haven't seen it already, you're probably going to see a law enforcement presence at certain grocery stores, maybe even gas stations. Gas right now is incredibly cheap, which is worrisome because whenever gas is cheap, at least here in Canada, the economy ain't doing too good. It's a sad thing, but that's just usually a good barometer of where we're at with things, whether we like it or not. Now, as many of you know, I am a dealer for survival and preparedness products. I don't hide that at all. I'm not trying to get more customers at this period of time. I assure you, I've been working 24/7 to try to keep up with orders, and it's almost a losing battle at this point, but I'm doing my best to keep up. But what I want to say is that the supply chain is totally crippling. They're telling me for most products, not even really products that I would assume people would buy, like backpacks and tomahawks and just, survival knives, things like that. We're talking mid-April is what they're saying. And they say that, but the reality is in mid-April, there's going to be a small supply, and that's going to quickly go. And then that's going to quickly be bumped back to May or June. So you're going to see some massive disruptions in this type of gear. And Mountain House is not going to be getting any stock for, I think, till summertime. And of course, once they get that stock, it's going to go rapidly. So there's a lot of shortages in every aspect of survival and preparedness right now. Now, what I've noticed in terms of people's purchases, the first thing people were purchasing was personal protective equipment. Then it went to food. Then it went, of course, to toilet paper. Toilet paper probably came before food for a lot of people, which makes no sense. And of course, that's why it's a meme now. But next you're going to see, and what I've seen, is people buying more personal protective equipment, emphasis on the protective security part of that. So people are buying survival knives. They're buying things that they can use to protect themselves. Security equipment, things to keep themselves secure. In the United States, they're stocking up on ammunition, firearms, things of that nature. I'm not saying it's going to get that bad where you're going to have to use that necessarily, but we may as well branch off on this tangent right now. We will definitely see an uptick in crime when the quarantine comes, when they start cordoning off areas. The reason why is that drug addicts don't take a day off. Okay, I work with people with substance abuse issues for many, many years, and they're not going to take a day off. And the problem is that law enforcement is going to be stretched to the limit, not only because they're going to be short-staffed, but because they're going to be needed elsewhere to deal with sick people. Lots of them are going to be doing the roles of the ambulance and the fire department, and there's going to be a lot of, job sharing, if you will. So they will be short-staffed. And as a result of this, people need to understand that a person who's addicted to substances is not going to respect quarantine rules, okay? And especially if you have these types of food shortages, and this is why the president came out and said this, because they know they're going to see an uptick in crime if people can't get the bare necessities. There's a quote that says, when people have nothing else to lose, they lose it. So you want to keep the people fed. So between people breaking quarantine and just trying to enforce that will be a logistical nightmare. I mean, they can barely keep up with crime as is, and the people who aren't going to respect quarantine are going to be the criminals. So, or the people who have addiction problems, and that addiction is going to pull them into risky situations regardless of the consequences. I mean, they partake in risky behavior in the best of times. So, something with a worst case scenario, 3% fatality rate isn't going to faze them one bit when every day they're rolling the dice. So I'm definitely seeing an uptick in people buying this type of security equipment. And I got to tell you guys, I've been thinking a lot more about security lately, especially with the nature of work I'm in. I mean, I have German Shepherds. I have all manner of personal protective equipment. I have so many security fail-safe systems you can't even imagine. But I'm still worried about it. Not that I'm losing sleep over it, but it's something I'm starting to think about. It's getting to that point because I'm always seeing this stuff at least 4 weeks into the future. I'm not Nostradamus or anything like that. I've just been living, breathing, prepping for the last 10 years. So, none of this stuff is a surprise to me. And I'm trying to read between the lines, because of course a lot of what I knew before this was theory, and now I'm trying to overlay that onto what is happening here, and some of it's matching up, some of it isn't, but most of it's matching up. So I was thinking the other day about fatality rates. Okay, so what you need to realize with fatality rates, oftentimes people are comparing this to the flu, and we get these flu statistics like 0.01% or something like that. I think it's actually, I've seen 0.01%. A lot of people quote 0.1%, but I've actually seen estimates as low as 0.01%. I'm not sure if they're talking about different strains of flu, but what we need to understand when we talk about these undocumented, unreported cases, these mild cases that don't self-report, that likely will bring the fatality rates down, people need to know that that is the case for any illness. There's many cases of flu which are never counted. They never reach the clinical level where they're counted, where the person goes to the doctor. And that's one of the things to consider, is that even a mild case of this had to be bad enough that people went to go and get tested, or they sought out their doctor for help. So what I've heard, and I heard Brad from Full Spectrum Survival commenting on this the other day, is that even a mild case is still a treacherous experience that nobody wants to experience. So be wary of when they say 80% of the cases are mild, because if you are malnourished, if you are stressed out and you can't get help, and that's raising the anxiety even more, those mild cases could turn into critical cases. And critical cases, without proper respiratory support in hospitals, acute care, they're going to turn into fatalities. So be very wary of these statistics that seek to downplay the fatality rates. While it may be the case that only 1% of people are going to pass on from this, which is what we're seeing from the Diamond Princess, that's reflected in the South Korean statistics, and they have sweeping testing measures. They probably have the most aggressive testing measures. I think almost 100,000 people were tested, probably even more than that. But that is something to consider, is that if they're saying that only 0.1% of people die from the flu, chances are there's 50% of flu cases are not factored into that. Unless they are, I don't know how they would know that. Maybe it's an estimation. If that was the case, then it's likely more, going with that 0.01% statistics. And if that's the case, then we're talking about fatality rates anywhere between 20 to 100 times worse than that. And that's not even breaking it down to the different strains of this, the L strain or the S strain. The L strain, of course, is more aggressive, more infectious, more lethal. The S strain, more mild. Anyways, too much to talk about, too little time. So all I can say for people is that you need to take this seriously. When I made that video last week predicting that there would be a case in Saskatoon in the next couple days, like I said, I don't have a crystal ball. I can't see the future. It's just common sense. It came from the major cities, Vancouver, Toronto. It worked its way inland to Winnipeg, to Calgary, to Edmonton, to Saskatoon. Now it's already in northern Saskatchewan, in the middle of absolute nowhere, where the population density is probably the least dense in the world. It's already there. So that means that it's everywhere, guys. Okay, so this is only going to get worse. And the problem with people in Saskatoon is that we are incredibly complacent. And we're going to spread this sucker around until we're in a lockdown mode, which is going to be the case in the next couple weeks. Mark my words. I hope I'm wrong, but at this point, it doesn't matter. The economy is in the shitter. Pardon my language, but it is. Yeah, I know the Dow Jones is doing all these weird things, and there's a lot of, I want to call it manipulation, but there's a lot of people trying to make money and game the system right now. And if that's your prerogative, do it. If you can do it, do it. But I don't believe the stock market had the worst day ever, followed by the best day ever. I mean, to me, that kind of volatility, I'm not setting my watch to that. So anyways, guys, all I can say is be prepared. Be at the ready. Last time I said we are just days away from things getting crazy. Now you need to take it on an hour by hour basis. It's getting that expedited simply because of the pace of things is moving so fast. We're already at 170,000 cases. Okay, so that's only going to keep magnifying. I said it was going to go exponential, and sure as hell the day after it started to blow up. But I hope I'm wrong about this, because I'd like to get back to just business as usual. I'd like to be doing gear review videos and just getting out there doing camping and survival stuff, but this situation won't permit it. So thanks again, guys. Stay safe.